Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. My name is Annabelle, and yes, just like the creepy doll. No, this isn't a story about haunted dolls or paranormal activity. Well, at least not about the dolls. I live in a small town called Sunny Point, a name that couldn't be more ironic if it tried. It rains nearly year-round, soaking the streets, fogging up car windows, and making everything feel a little too gray. I grew up here, but I left for college in the city. Now, summer break has rolled around, and like any financially doomed student, I need a job. There aren't many options in town, so I'm going back to my usual place, the Sunny Point Motel. This place was my first real job, my first paycheck, and my first introduction to the absolute nightmare that is customer service. It's a small, two-story roadside motel, the kind you pass by on long drives and assume no one actually stays in. But people do. And those people? Some are just weird, and others are something else entirely. I stepped into the motel lobby, shaking off the rain from my jacket. The place had not changed a bit. The dim yellow lights buzzed overhead, the air smelled like old carpet and cheap coffee, and the same green and brown floral wallpaper peeled at the corners. There's a small front desk, a vending machine that hummed in the corner, and a stack of faded pamphlets advertising local attractions no one ever visits. And behind the desk? Maggie. She's been the motel's manager since before I was born. In her early 60s, with short, graying hair and an expression that permanently says, "I've seen some shit." But underneath that, she's cool as hell. The kind of boss who lets you raid the snack stash and doesn't micromanage unless you're actively setting something on fire. She looked up from her crossword puzzle and gave me a grin. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." I dropped my backpack and leaned on the counter. "You mean the cat that curses your entire shift if you see it? Because if that thing dragged me in, I'd have just turned around and left." Maggie chuckled and pushed something across the desk, a laminated piece of paper. I knew exactly what it was. "I already know the rules, Maggie." "Humor me," I sighed but took the paper. The first few lines were normal enough. "Lock the front door at midnight. Call this number if the vending machine breaks down. Laundry is guest responsibility. Don't offer to do it for them." Then the weird ones. "Do not give out the key to room 112. Never ask any questions to the robbed man. Do not look into the motel pool after midnight. If you see the black cat, prepare for a bad shift. Never mention the missing men to the police." I taped my finger on the last one. "Still on the list, huh?" Maggie didn't even blink. "Still applies." I sat the paper down and stretched. "You know, I tell my college friends about this place, and they think I'm messing with them." "Let them think that. You're the one who actually survived a shift here." She was not wrong. I picked up my employee key card, grabbed a clipboard with room check-ins, and prepared myself for another summer at the weirdest motel in existence. I just hoped I didn't break another rule. Because last time, it didn't end well. The first few nights of my shifts went by uneventfully, or, well, as uneventfully as a shift at the Sunny Point Motel can go. A couple of truckers checked in, a family with 2 hyperactive kids trashed the vending machine area, and some guy tried to haggle with me over room prices like I had any control over that. Standard motel weirdness. But then, on my 4th night back, I made a mistake. A really, really bad mistake. It was just after 10 p.m., and I was working the front desk alone. Maggie had left an hour ago, and the only sound in the lobby was the low hum of the vending machine and the occasional drip of rain outside. A man walked in, soaking wet, dragging a cheap suitcase behind him. He looked exhausted, like someone who's been on the road too long and just needed a place to crash. "Just one night," he said, pulling out his wallet. I noted, punched in the details, and grabbed a key from the board behind me. The motel still used actual keys instead of key cards, which added to the whole "this place is stuck in the 90s" aesthetic. I barely even glanced at what I was handing him. He took the key, mumbled a thanks, and trudged off toward the hallway. And that's when I saw it. Room 112. I froze. My stomach dropped as I looked at the empty slot where the key used to be. Oh, shit. I grabbed the clipboard, flipping through the check-in list. He should have gotten room 108. I gave him the wrong key. A cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. I hesitated for a second before bolting out from behind the desk. The hallway felt longer than usual, the overhead lights buzzing slightly, casting weird, stretched-out shadows on the carpet. I saw the man just as he reached room 112. "Sir?" "Wait." He didn't stop. He inserted the key. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe the door to refuse to open. Maybe for the man to turn around and ask what the hell my problem was. But neither of those things happened. The lock clicked. The door swung open, and the screaming started. A sound that shouldn't come from a human throat. Raw, animalistic, guttural. A woman's screams. The man stumbled backward, dropping his suitcase. He clutched his ears, his face twisting in horror. I didn't think. I ran to the door and grabbed the handle, trying to shove it open further. But it didn't budge. The screams got louder. They echoed down the hallway, bouncing off the walls, rattling inside my skull. Doors creaked open along the corridor. Other guests peeked out, faces pale, expressions a mix of annoyance and fear. Someone muttered, "What the hell is going on?" The man who tried to check into 112 was staggering away from the door, shaking his head, eyes wide. He looked like he was about to puke. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran back to the front desk and grabbed the phone. I dialed Maggie. She picked up on the second ring. "You gave out the key to room 112, didn't you?" she said. My hands were shaking. "Maggie, there's someone in there. A woman. She's screaming. I can't." "There's no one in the room, Annabelle." The screaming was still going. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "What the hell do you mean? I can hear her. The screams will stop in the morning." I felt my stomach twist. I should call the police. No. Maggie's voice was sharper than I've ever heard it. "There's no one in that room, Annabelle. There never was. And there never will be." The line went dead, and I just stood there listening as the screams carried on through the night. I didn't sleep. The screaming didn't stop. It didn't even fade. It stayed the same, loud and constant, like a recording stuck on loop. Guests kept coming down to the front desk to complain, their faces pale, their voices nervous. I gave them vague reassurances that it was a plumbing issue or a prank or some other excuse that even I didn't believe. Every time I glanced at the hallway, I expected to see something. But the door to room 112 never opened again. The man I gave the key to? He checked out immediately. Didn't say a word. Just dropped the key on the counter and walked out into the rain. Morning came. The second the sunlight peeked through the motel windows, the screaming cut off. Just like that. Like someone flipped a switch. The silence was almost worse. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a spare key from behind the desk. I walked down the hallway, heart hammering against my ribs. I stopped at room 112. I unlocked the door. I didn't know what I expected to find. Blood? A body? Any sign that something happened? But there was nothing. The bed was perfectly made. The air smelled stale, undisturbed. And there, sitting in the dead center of the bed, was the room key I gave out last night, placed there neatly, intentionally. Like it had been waiting for me. I stared at it for a long time. Then, without a word, I picked it up. And I never touched the keys to room 112 again. I didn't think I'd ever be grateful for a normal shift at the Sunnypoint Motel, but after the nightmare with room 112, I welcomed boring with open arms. For a few nights, everything was quiet. The biggest issue I dealt with was a guest complaining about their TV remote not working, which, after what I've been through, barely qualified as a problem. Then on my 6th night back, I met him. The robed man. And no, Not robbed as in mugged. I learned that the hard way. It was just after 1 a.m. The motel lobby was silent, the front desk bathed in the dull glow of the computer monitor. Outside, the rain drizzled against the windows, creating a soft, rhythmic patter. I was leaning on the counter, scrolling through my phone to stay awake, when I heard it. Knock. Knock. I almost dropped my phone. The sound didn't come from the front door, it came from the side window. Slowly, I turned my head. And there he was. A tall figure standing just outside the glass, his face obscured by the hood of a long, dark robe. The fabric dragged against the wet pavement, heavy and unfamiliar, like something ripped straight from the Middle Ages. I felt my breath catch in my throat, the laminated rules flazing through my mind. Never ask any questions to the robed man. This was him. This was the rule. And I was not about to screw this up. He raises a hand, palm flat against the glass. His fingers were long and thin, his nails too pale in the dim motel lighting. Then, he stepped toward the front entrance. I stood completely still as the automatic doors slid open. He walked in, his robe whispering against the tile floor. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge the rain dripping from his sleeves, just reached into his pocket. For a split second, my brain screamed at me to run. But then, he pulled out cash. $70. Exact change for one of the cheaper rooms. I swallowed. I took the money. I did not ask any questions. My hands shaking as I grabbed a room key, making damn sure it's not 112, and sat it on the counter. The robed man picked it up, turned, walked down the hall, and disappeared into his room. I exhaled shakily once he was gone, my pulse still pounding in my ears. I expected something to happen, a scream, a door slamming shut, a sudden cut to black, like I just activated some horror movie curse. But nothing happened. The lobby returned to silence. I checked the security monitor. The hallway outside his room was empty. He was just in there. And I didn't know what happened next. Morning came. At precisely 6:30 a.m., I heard it, the soft click of a key being placed on the counter. I looked up. The robed man was standing there. His hood was still up, his face obscured, like the motel lights refused to illuminate him. He didn't speak, didn't gesture. He just stood there. Then, without another sound, he turned around and walked out. The automatic doors slid shut. I waited until he was completely gone before picking up the key. It was cold in my hand. And for some reason I had the deep, unsettling feeling that the room he slept in is just as empty now as it was before he ever arrived. I hate the Sunny Point Motel's pool. I hated it before I even knew the rules, before I realized this motel was more than just sketchy guests and shitty plumbing. There's something about it that always felt wrong, like the water was too dark, too still, like it was watching you. And of course, there's a rule about it. Do not look into the motel pool after midnight. When I first read that, I figured it was about some kind of reflection thing, like Bloody Mary or some urban legend where you see something that isn't supposed to be there. I found out the truth last summer, and I still have nightmares about it. It was late July, peak summer heat, and the motel was packed with families on road trips, people too cheap for the chain hotels in the city. Among them was a couple with 2 little boys, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The parents clearly didn't give a damn about what the kids did. Let them run around, scream in the halls, trash the vending machine area, and apparently swim in the pool after closing. It was a little past midnight when I first heard it. A splash. A scream. Another splash. My stomach tightened. I knew the rule. I knew I wasn't supposed to look. But how the hell do you ignore a drowning kid? I ran outside. The pool area was dimly lit by a single flickering light, casting weird, rippling shadows over the water. And there they were. One boy was in the pool, thrashing, his face barely above the surface. The other was leaning over the edge, reaching for him, crying. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran forward, kicked off my shoes, and jumped in. The water was freezing. But worse than that, something grabbed my ankle. I barely had time to process the slimy, slick touch before it yanked me downward. I kicked, thrashed, clawed at the water, but whatever was down there was strong. A tentacle. I know how that sounds, but that's what it was. It wrapped around my leg, pulling me deeper, tightening like a living rope. My lungs burned. The pool felt deeper than it should have been, the bottom nowhere in sight. And then, light. A bright, sharp beam cut through the water. And just like that, the thing let go. I kicked up to the surface, gasping, scrambling for the edge. Someone grabbed my arm and hauled me out. I collapsed onto the wet pavement, coughing up water, my entire body shaking. I turned, looking for the thing in the water. But it was just a pool again. Nothing moving beneath the surface, nothing grabbing at my legs, just water. The kid's mother stood over me, her flashlight still on, pointed at the pool. She looked confused, then relieved, then slightly annoyed. "Jesus, you scared me," she muttered, pulling her kids toward her. I just stared at her, still shivering. She had no idea. She had no idea she saved my life. If she hadn't come outside with that flashlight, I don't think I'd be here. The next day when my shift started, I went straight to Maggie. I told her everything. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she just nodded. "Glad you found something that works," she said, taking a sip of her black coffee. That's when I asked if I could add to the rules. Maggie smiled and handed me a permanent marker. I grabbed the laminated sheet and wrote, in bold letters beneath the rule about the pool, "If you must check the pool, use a flashlight." I still avoid the pool area at night. I don't stare into the water too long, and I never ever forget the feeling of something pulling me under. I try not to believe in bad luck. I mean, yeah, I work at a motel with a haunted pool and a room that screams all night, but luck? That feels like superstitious nonsense. At least that's what I used to think. Until I saw the cat, and my entire shift went straight to hell. It started innocent enough. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and I was halfway through my shift, sipping on a questionable gas station energy drink to keep myself awake. The rain had finally stopped, and everything outside was eerily still, the only sound coming from the buzzing lobby lights. Then, I saw it. A black cat, sitting outside the front doors, just staring at me. I froze, my brain instantly recalling one of the strange motel rules. If you see the black cat, prepare for a bad shift. I'd heard about it before. Maggie warned me, but up until now, I'd never actually seen the damn thing. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "It's just a cat," I muttered under my breath. Then the computer crashed. I don't mean froze up or got laggy. I mean full-on, blue-screened, died in front of me. The system shut down completely, taking all the guest records, booking info, and room keys with it. I smacked the keyboard. No, don't do this to me. The monitor flickered, spat out an error message I'd never seen before, and refused to turn back on. That was bad omen number 1. Bad omen number 2? The vending machine broke, and not in a minor way. The thing started spitting out snacks like it was possessed, launching bags of chips and candy bars across the floor. One of the guests, a half-asleep trucker, walked in just in time to see a Coke bottle rocket out and slam against the wall. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us knew what the hell to say. Then the phone started ringing. I picked it up, still rattled. "Front desk, this is Annabelle." At first, silence. Then a whisper. "Is she there?" My stomach dropped. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver, my fingers tightening around it. That was bad omen number 3. And then, just to make things worse, a guest snapped their key in the door. By this point, I was ready to throw in the towel. I had to grab a pair of pliers, march over to room 214, and try to fish the broken key out of the lock, while the guest stood behind me, grumbling under his breath. The entire time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something worse to happen. Because the thing is, once the bad luck starts, it doesn't stop until your shift is over. I was expecting something catastrophic, but instead, at exactly 6 a.m., everything fixed itself. the computer magically rebooted, all records restored, the vending machine back to normal, the snapped key, the guest found a spare in his luggage. Just like that, the chaos was over. I dragged myself back to the front desk, completely exhausted, and dropped into my chair. A few minutes later, Maggie walked in, sipping her morning coffee. She took one look at me and smirked. "Saw the cat, didn't you?" I groaned and slumped onto the counter. "That little bastard ruined my entire shift." She chuckled, completely unfazed. "Yeah, he does that. The last rule is the one I never talk about. The others? Yeah, I can joke about them. I can roll my eyes at the black cat or groan about the pool trying to drown me. But this one is different. Because this rule is about real people. Or at least, they were real. Until they weren't. She doesn't come often. Maybe once a month. Always alone at first. She walks into the motel just before sundown, her heels clicking softly against the tile floor, her perfume lingering in the air. She's maybe 3 or 4 years older than me, but there's something timeless about her. Her beauty is unnatural. She's the kind of woman that turns heads in every room she enters, the kind you might see on the cover of some high-end fashion magazine. Only none of those women could ever hold a candle to her. She never says much, just pays in cash, takes a key, and leaves. She always comes back later. And she never comes back alone. At first, I thought she was an escort. It made sense. She'd bring some guy with her, someone who looked like he was barely holding back a grin, leading him upstairs to whatever the hell they were about to do. But then things got strange. The men she brought in started changing. They weren't the cocky, rich-looking types anymore. They were locals. Men I had seen before. Men who, in any normal scenario, would never be able to land a woman like her. The kind of men who had no business stepping through the doors of this motel with her on their arm. And then, one morning, I noticed something. She checked in. She checked out. Alone. I remember the first time I thought, that's weird. I was working the morning shift, running on 2 hours of sleep, barely paying attention as she dropped her key on the counter and walked out the front door. It wasn't until she was gone that I realized. Where was the guy? I checked the security footage later that night. I expected to see her leaving the room alone. I expected to see her guy sneaking out the back door or something. But when I played the footage, there was no guy at all. It was just her. From the moment she walked in to the moment she left, she was alone. But I knew that wasn't true. I had checked that man in myself. I had seen him. And now he was just gone. Then the missing persons reports started piling up. First, it was just 1 or 2. Then it was 5. Then 10. The cops came by a few times, asking questions, looking through records. Maggie never said anything. She never lied, but she never told the truth either. The officers asked me, "Have you seen this man?" And I remembered the final rule on the list. Never tell the police you saw the missing men. I looked at the picture. I looked at Maggie. Then I shook my head. No, I don't think so. And that was it. They never found them. They never would. At first I felt guilty. I felt sick, thinking about these men, how they had families, lives, people who cared about them. But then the details started coming out. One was abusive toward his wife. Another had been fired from his job for stealing. Another had been caught on camera hurting his own kid. It was never random. It was never some innocent guy looking for a one-night stand. It was always someone who had done something terrible. Something that, deep down, they probably knew couldn't be forgiven. And she knew. Somehow, she always knew. I still don't know who she is. I don't know where the men go. I don't know if they die or if they get dragged somewhere far worse. But I do know this. I've seen a lot of monsters pass through this motel. And I think she's the only one who cleans them up. So I follow the rule. I never tell the police I saw the missing men. And I never ask questions about her. Because some things are better left unknown.